Hello friends, welcome back. Happy Friday. I'm Leighellen and this is Mama Leighellen's Book Nook. So today I'm so excited because I have an author interview to share with you. Last night was the chat with the author for Sparks Like Stars. We got to chat with Nadia Hashimi, and it was my Mama Leighellen's book club crew, and all of us had already read the book and discussed it. We had a midweek chat last week and a final chat on Sunday. So this was our chance to just really dive deep with the author, and she was a gracious guest. She brought some pictures with her that she shared with us from Afghanistan. She brought just great stories of her childhood and her parents' life back then in the 70s, and then gave us great insights and background information on the book. So if you have read this and you want to watch this interview, do so now. Just so you know, if you watch this, hopefully you have already read this book. And if you haven't, stop what you're doing. Go buy this book, go read this book, and then come back and watch this because there will be spoilers. Either way, Nadia was a gracious guest. I completely enjoyed our time together. She answered all of our questions. We had a great discussion, and I hope that you enjoy this interview. Enjoy our time with Nadia and Sparks Like Stars.
I cannot hear you. You got to figure that out.
Now.
When my audio's on. Oh my gosh. Honestly, I tabbed like this entire book.
I saw your picture. Is this a record?
This book, so it might be a record. When you guys hop on, off to the right, at least on my screen it's off to the right, there's like a little chat. So say hi so I know you're here, and then let me know where you are zooming from. I'm really hoping my friend Joshi hops on because she's from Canada, which is cool. That's funny. Hello, there's Nadia.
Hi,
Hello.
everyone.
Did your library event go?
It was good. It was Simsbury, Connecticut. Kind of nice to just, yeah, I was in Simsbury an hour ago. And
That's impressive. You got in your little time machine.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool what we've been able to do and learn how to do in the last year.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to see the silver lining in these online platforms, but this is good. I will say I used to do these events like through Skype, and not very good.
Not as good. Well, I've also tried them on Instagram, but you drop a lot and it gets all pixelated and it's really hard for other people to be engaged. And so this is great. And this records it, so then I can also go post it to my BookTube channel so other people can watch it, which is good. So I'm all about hyping up this book that I love and adore so much.
Oh, I so appreciate it. I mean, it's just, it's one thing to kind of course, we write for ourselves, of course, but then it's really like the book comes full circle when you can share it with people and it's received well. It means the world. So I really appreciate that.
Right. How different is your process right now because of COVID? I mean, you might be maybe coming out of it a little, but like normally wouldn't you actually be on an actual book tour and like going to small bookstores and doing readings and like book signings in person where people can like buy your book from you in person?
Yeah, I miss all of that. I really do, because there's a different energy around it. I mean, I think some people are more able to access these kinds of events now because they're online. Like I myself am able to access some things that I couldn't otherwise get to because now it's online and I can kind of log in and still, be watching my kids. But it's a different energy, so I miss that.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that one day we'll get, maybe on the other side of this, which may be taking a while to get there, but on the other side of this, we'll figure out like a hybrid, right? So that we can take the best of what we've learned to be able to do, that flexing, and then also be able to be in person, where we give people kind of maybe the options of doing either or. So I don't know, we'll see. I'm hopeful.
What I think is really cool about COVID, or just not COVID, but just the COVID life we're living right now, is that as a reader, I feel like we have more access to our favorite authors than we've ever had, you know, because even to try to get to some of these events, you know, when there are author signings, there's usually a limit, or, you know, they charge you a certain fee and maybe you can't get in, maybe it's on a day you can't go. So like, it's been a blessing to just a normal reader like me to be able to have access to, you know, these authors that I adore, and really get to dive in more and ask questions that I want to ask, versus going to a reading where you like, you know, maybe someone asks the question that you want, but maybe you didn't care about their question.
Yeah.
But you don't get to ask your own. So it would be nice if there is some kind of a hybrid.
I think so. And that's what I like about, you know, like I said, getting away from Skype and doing more of Zoom, is I can see faces, and at least I can like see who I'm talking to. You know, I'm like that Brady Bunch screen. Like I've got
The Brady Bunch screen is super fun. I still can't quite figure it all out. Like, I wish I could see everyone. It only shows me like 10 people at a time or something.
You can. You're seeing everybody. There'd be an arrow.
I am. I just have to like.
Yeah. Are you in the large grid?
I don't know. You know, I barely know how to operate this thing, Kira. I am really good at reading. I am not so good at technology.
It's in the top right corner for anybody that doesn't know. There's a view and you can switch to gallery view.
And what does that do? Oh, now I see everyone. But Joshi made it. Joshi!
I'm impressed.
Hi. Oh, I'm so excited you're here. Oh, this is so fun. Joshi's our Canadian, our token Canadian. Not that you're a token Canadian, Joshi, really.
Hey, Canada.
Right.
I love Canada.
Oh, Canada. You don't want me to sing. I'm sorry. Okay, Nadia, I want to be respectful of your time. So let me see. I think we've got.
You don't have to be too respectful of my time because it's bedtime. So I'm letting my husband do all of that.
That is so awesome. We obviously, as you can probably see, it's all women here, and there are a lot of mamas. So part of why we do this chat when we do is because people need to put their kids to bed, or they need to like have the husband feed them dinner and they can have a little bit of sanity time. So yeah, this time tends to work. Except for when we get super chatty. Like, I think the chat for Susan Meisner went like 2.5 hours. We talked a lot. That was until the East Coast people were like, it's like 11 o'clock. Let's start. I got my big old list of questions, and I know some of my girls have questions. Okay, ladies, started. I'm so excited. Okay, before we get started, first of all, I have 2 things I want to say before I forget, because I will get so excited and then forget to say what I actually want to say. So number 1, first of all, thank you so much for writing this book. It was so cool to see a unique perspective on Afghanistan that is one that I had not heard or known prior to reading this book. So thank you for blessing us with that. I think that's one of the reasons why A, I love to read, and B, I really believe in reading own voice authors, because you can really tell that your passion for that place comes through. So thank you for that. Secondly, your writing is awesome. I'm sure that's a very technical, that's a very really deep discussion, but I was so impressed with the way that you were able to write this character who has been through, witnessed murder, been through the foster care system, lived as a refugee, has been through so much, and yet me as this, suburban middle America wife felt like totally connected to her somehow. So I think that speaks to the power of your writing. So this was awesome. You're awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. All right. Well, you've made my night completely.
That's it. We're just here to just love on you tonight.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, because, I write these stories hoping that they'll do a little bit of that magic that I have felt with books that I've read and loved and, been able to tear through, and what those stories have done for me. So it's really nice to be part of that, energy. And I'm really glad to hear that it connected with you.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So I guess I want to start there with what made you choose this particular story? Because I know you've written other stories that are based in the same area. What made you want to write this particular version?
So So this story is one where, I think, okay, I was the kid who was reading all the time, right? I was in the local library. I was in my school library. Like my first job was the checkout person in my school elementary school library. And I was like, I love stamping those little cards. And I would read everything. I loved reading. And I didn't realize that, I almost felt like I was searching for like stories that I could see a little bit of myself in. And sometimes you find a story that's like a little bit close and it's kind of exciting. And I also grew up kind of feeling that the story about Afghanistan, the story about like my parents' homeland, was told very differently. And the images that I was seeing as an American child growing up in the 80s in New Jersey with big hair, and I'm seeing like, it's Cold War stuff, right? It's like Reagan era. And I've got parents who are just so devastated that we've got a Soviet invasion in the country. So they can't go back. We can't visit family. And, at that time, there's not an internet, there's not a lot of communication. So growing up with these images of a very simplistic narrative about Afghanistan is that there are these bearded warriors fighting from the mountains to drive out these Russian invaders. And the Americans kind of coming in like with oiled biceps and rescuing, right?
Loved your Rambo analogies in the book.
Yeah, but I mean, literally, and we had Rambo on a VHS tape on our like living room shelf, and we would watch it because it was like the only thing that was about Afghanistan. It was that, and there was one MacGyver episode. Loved MacGyver, right? So like the narratives were really limited, and they didn't match up with the pictures that I had at home, the pictures of my parents' life from back home. It was kind of like a very baffling. And I think, I've been thinking about how it connects. And I think like when I talk to kids about storytelling, when I do like my classroom visits, I tell them that they're storytellers, and you start becoming a storyteller when you look at a picture book, right? And you flip through and you weave a narrative from these images. And so the narrative that I had to weave were based on the images that I had, which were either like the Rambo, and then trying to weave that together with pictures of like my dad in a paisley shirt with like too many buttons open and wild hair. And, my mom's family parties where they're like in pleated skirts and their hair's all done up. It's really hard to put those two together and believe that we're talking about the same country. Mm. So I really wanted to write this book to talk about that gap in understanding of, what happened, because that is something that I do a lot of book club discussions. And around the other stories, the question always comes back to like, well, how did this happen to Afghanistan? Like what turned it into decades of war? And so I wanted to take a look at that moment of history and then also introduce a little bit of, different information, lacking information in the narratives around Afghanistan.
Well, I think you did it phenomenally well. A lot of us were very, moved by it. And also our eyes were opened. We were surprised by some of the things, that like when Boba's talking about, you can be anything you want to be. And her father's telling her that she can be a doctor, it's so contrary to what our current day knowledge or assumptions are. I think a lot of it's assumptions too.
Yeah, it is. I think, my mom's an engineer. My mom graduated from Kabul University with an engineering degree. My friends' moms, there's some physicians, there's some, there's all different kinds of professionals. And that's that generation that grew up. So like her father would tell her those things, that you can be whatever you want to be, go to be an engineer. So these are not stretches of the imagination. This was the reality. And that's really what I wanted to introduce. And I'm thankful to say that this is also now happening again in Afghanistan, where you've got women who are studying at the medical schools. They are studying to be engineers. They are serving in all levels of government. They are, artists and performers and athletes. And so there's so much happening that's really missing from our conversations.
Right. And books like this help to switch that narrative and why they're so important.
I hope so.
So given that your parents had so much of this history, what did your research look like when it came to trying to talk about this time period? Did you already know a lot of it because you grew up hearing your parents talk about these stories, or did you have to like start from scratch because you also grew up American, so your own perceptions might be different than the reality of that time?
So the research for this book was so fun. I think I spent too much time researching this book because you end up going down these rabbit holes that are really kind of cool, and especially with the different elements, you know, I mean, like the hippies and that was, you know, based on, so when I was in high school, most people at that point, it was pre 9/11, people didn't really know what Afghanistan was, didn't know much about it. And so I was usually met with kind of like a blank stare if people ever asked me, except one time I was at my friend's house and her father was Dutch. And he asked me, Nadia, where's your family from? And I told him, and he was like, oh, Afghanistan, you guys have the best weed. Like,
I live in Colorado, so I understand that comment.
way to feel seen, you know? So, and so, you know, I've had these different experiences actually in like library talks. Almost invariably, there's one person of a more senior person in the room who kind of lingers and then afterwards comes up to me and tells me that they spent time in like the late 60s or early 70s as an American working in Afghanistan doing something. So I you know, I wanted to pull together these pieces, the research, and I did pull out some pictures of the research. A lot of my research is
good. I made you
so,
I made you a co-host on here. So like if you have something from your screen that you want to share with us.
just a handful of pictures. So if you want, I can share those with you and we'll kind of walk through them and then you'll just see what my research was.
We love
I will do my best to be very tech savvy right now. Let's see. Okay, here we go.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right, so this is a picture of just Afghanistan, probably in like the late 60s to early 70s. This is not a family picture. It's one that kind of circulates online. And there's a series of these with like, I mean, they're fashion shows. There's like a Vogue cover. It's just a very, very different time, a very cosmopolitan city. And this is what my mom's Kabul looked like, right? Okay, so when it came to the, you know, in honor of my high school friend's father, I wanted to incorporate this hippie experience, you know, people who were kind of like traveling into the country. And part of the research took me to this little travel guide that had been put together called Head East. And it literally told people different tips of how to get from, you know, one place to another, what to watch out for, what to avoid, where to score the best weed. And
so that when it says like tripping in Herat, that's actually like tripping out.
Yeah.
Not like falling down.
I mean, this guy, I've read it cover to cover and it is fascinating.
Gosh.
And it's just, I mean, look, you see, hash is illegal in Afghanistan. Be cool, be calm. Like, it's really good.
Be cool.
Be cool. Which is just good advice in general. Just be cool. I think so. Anyway, there's a lot of little stories that are in this travel guide, which were pretty fascinating. And then also a lot of just pictures. People are posting pictures online from their travels during that time. So it's really cool to be able to access these online. And I use these, you know, when I'm writing, like I kind of dive into the picture and I try to look around and get a sense of what it felt like, what the interaction might have been like between these individuals who are in this picture, but are very obviously clearly different backgrounds. And that to me is a really interesting point to explore is these like, it's not a clash of cultures, but it's just a interaction point where people are learning about each other and where people are experiencing something completely different. The other piece of it that was really interesting to me was taking a look at what it was like for a woman to be in the US Foreign Service at that time and to learn about how much progress was made by women and what it was like, you know, even in a time where you think like in the 70s, they should be kind of, if they're in the Foreign Service, that they shouldn't face the discrimination that they were, but women who were in the Foreign Service were, they had to be single. And if they got married, there was sort of this unspoken rule that they had to resign. So you couldn't be married and then be in the Foreign Service. And so this woman, Alison Palmer, who did not serve in Afghanistan, but she served in other places, she launched this class action lawsuit against the State Department, anti-discrimination, which was actually a bit controversial. I hear not only from my reading, but then in Foreign Service officers that I've spoken to in person. There's a group called ADST, American Diplomatic Studies. I'm messing up the name, but there's a resource online, and they have interviews with all these Foreign Service officers in different places of the world in different periods of time. And so I looked at the ones who served in Kabul in Afghanistan at the time of the coup, and then actually made contact with one woman who was serving there and witnessed all of this. And so to be able to get her firsthand experience, ask her questions, and help kind of, guide what was happening in the story was pretty amazing. This is a picture of Arg on the left. This is the presidential palace, and it basically still looks like this now. But this is an older picture. And like I said, I kind of, dive into these images and try to insert myself into them. And then I put that together with the, stories that I get from my family. But some of the political stuff and the other events are a bit different. Here is a picture of then President Daoud Khan, Afghanistan's first president. And this quote, I think, really just captures what was happening at that time. He says, "I feel the happiest when I can light my American cigarettes with my Soviet matches." It's just kind of, trying to balance these two big world powers and what their interests are in the country. And then I had a lot of fun kind of digging into the archaeology and what happens to the antiquities, what happens to artifacts when a country is struggling with conflict, and how do these end up on the black market. So that site of Ayhanum, all of this is really based on what was going on in the country. And then, of course, ultimately, it's this secret about where the bodies were buried of those individuals and how they were discovered decades later. So this was the New York Times article that I'd read, which just kind of blew my mind at how can a country that's this small, we all know each other so well. I can't go to an Afghan event and, within a few minutes, we realized that there's 2-degree separation from anyone who had lived in Kabul. And so how were they able to keep this a secret was pretty remarkable, but that really drew me in. And then this is just a picture from the ultimate burial once they did recover the bodies. So those are some of the images. So I use stuff like that. And then I literally will put out maps and, kind of trace where my characters are, where they're going, and then do a lot of reading to make sure that I'm staying accurate to a point with historical events.
That was fantastic. I ate all of that up. I'm sure everybody else did too. We love that kind of behind the scenes of how these stories came to be.
I think, and this, like I said, this is the one where I spent too much time doing, what are you doing? Research. Let me just look at another 2,000 pictures of hippies in Afghanistan or wherever.
I mean, that in itself, just that whole scene in the bus is epic, and definitely not something I would have thought would have happened. In the real life president, when the coup happened, were there any survivors? Because in your story, we've all read the book, so there's no spoilers. We've all read the book. I was like, before I speak, I just want you to know that the people on here are all part of my book club. We've all read the book. We met on Sunday and have already discussed the book in detail. So we are literally here just for you and to talk to you and ask you questions specific. So in your book, there is a survivor. So was there a survivor in real life, or how did that all go?
There were survivors. And actually, so what happened was I listened to an interview that was done with the grandson of, or one of the grandsons of the president who survived. And so the character that you meet in this story, it's a bit based on that individual's experience. And I didn't want to really make it based on anyone, because these are people who are still alive. And, a bit out of respect. And like I said, it's a very small community. So certainly there's somebody who knows somebody. But there were people who survived. And he, for example, the grandson, was actually taken to a hospital. He wasn't sure why he was taken to a hospital when everyone else had been killed. And there were others who survived as well. And then they were actually flown out by the Shah of Iran. And managed to, live in exile for a while. So it was a really kind of bizarre thing that happened. But the president had essentially holed himself up, told the rest of his family that they could leave, that they should leave. But several members of the family had said, no, we're going to stay. I don't know if they expected to lose their lives that night, or if they thought this was just more of an ideological battle. So it's really unclear. And that president had come into power by a bloodless coup. He had taken the seat from his cousin, but he did that when his cousin had flown out of the country. And so it was a kind of a more seamless shift of power. So I don't know what he was really thinking was going to happen, but several of his family members did lose their lives with him.
That was horrific. Obviously we are all readers, and a lot of us early on connected the whole Anastasia Russia connection. And then you end up eventually talking about it in the book where you kind of tie it in. But I just can't even imagine in your story what she went through and witnessed, and the continual tragedies that she kind of ends up in. And yet she is truly a relatable character. So how did you end up making her so relatable? Or like, what is it about the way that you write, do you think, that makes all of us have so much compassion for this character that we can't really truly fathom what she's experienced?
I mean, I think, I don't have anyone in my life who survived a coup like this, obviously, but there are certain, I think, elements of the traumas that she's experienced. I have at least two friends who lost their fathers, who are Afghan Americans, who lost their fathers. Their fathers basically disappeared. They were like of the political disappearings, right? We had in my mother's family, her uncles were of a generation where they were killed because of their political beliefs as well. So, but more so with my friends, I've seen them and a little sliver of what their experience is like to live a life where their father just disappeared one day, and it was because of his political beliefs, and then they have to just kind of live with that mystery of what happened. So there's a lot of inserting myself into someone's shoes and trying to be really respectful about how to do that without minimizing the impact of trauma, without glorifying what it's like to be a survivor, without, kind of saying, oh, with a little bit of grit, you'll get past everything and that you've been dealt with. Not everyone does. And yet some people do, and all of this happens very differently. So there's a lot that I draw on from the people around me who have been able to get through, what I deem to be like horrific life events, and just tapping into some of that energy without tapping into their specific stories.
Now, you yourself are a pediatrician, right?
Yes.
So how much of your own experience is in her character?
Well, I could definitely, write about what it's like to go to medical school and be in New York City. I was in New York City as a medical student during 9/11. I was in Brooklyn. So there was a lot of that story that, and this is different from my other stories, where I actually leaned a little bit more into my personal experience. I think I made her obviously very different from me in terms of what her background and what her earlier childhood experiences were. And I think she's, far more badass, but that aside, she's somebody who I didn't know what those experiences were like. Like I said, to be an Afghan American, and she's sort of a closeted Afghan American at that point, but those experiences were something that I could draw on because I personally was there and did experience that shift where the world was, clueless to what Afghan Americans, who we were, where did our allegiances lie, and then all of a sudden it was like this rude awakening, where everybody was looking at Afghan Americans. And so there were some experiences that I had that I did kind of, weave into the story a little bit, just to give people a sense of the Afghan American experiences, which is not something that I have written extensively about in the other stories.
I thought that was a really highlight of the book too, though. Those scenes when she's crossing the street, my heart was racing. I think we were all stressed out during that scene, or just, in the hospital when she mentions that, people maybe don't want her help, or, wonder what she's doing there. So are those things that you experienced?
So on the actual day of 9/11, my cousin, I was in Brooklyn, so we were just across the water. My cousin worked in World Financial Center, which was right next door to World Trade Center. And my family was in upstate New York. So we were all kind of like in the area, but obviously me and my cousin were much closer. And then my cousin was directly, in the adjacent building. So that day, the subway system had shut down. Like once I found out my cousin's okay, medical school had just shut down, everything just shut down. And I was walking home to my apartment with a small group of friends. One was Egyptian, one South Asian, actually, and then two South Asian and two Egyptian and one South Asian. And then all of a sudden, these guys from across the street just started like yelling things at us. And I don't remember the exact words, but I just remember feeling like, wait, are you talking to me? I'd never felt like that before. It was a very, just a bizarre experience. And it was more like shock. Like I was like, wait, they're talking to us, So I think that, and then obviously things changed, and that is a pretty mild experience. I think there were a lot of knee-jerk reactions and, like I said, assumptions that were being made about Afghan Americans. And so I wanted to just, talk about that experience, and then talk about what it was like for all Americans, Afghan Americans, and all Americans to get through that, to get to know each other a bit better. And we do that through having conversations like this, where then we understand a little bit more of, who we are, what kind of diversity we have, what our history is, and then how we live our lives as Americans too.
Absolutely. And that's the power of books and reading, and even just this platform that each, you look across here and you've got all these women that have all now read this book, and then they're going to go tell their, husbands and friends and kids about it. And then they'll go read that book. And it's just, the slow wave of understanding that hopefully makes us a little better every day.
I think so. I believe in it.
Well, what I would like to do next, if you're okay with it, is to just start calling on each one of these gals to ask their questions. I'm sure they're all chomping at the bit here. They've got some good ones planned for you. So I'm excited. I'm excited to hear what they have to say. So,
me too.
Miss Kira, I think you are up first. I don't know which of the 5 questions you're going to ask, but
I was going to say, I'm sure others had the same questions as me. So I don't want to, I want everybody to have their moment here. So I kind of have a piggyback on a question that was already asked. It seemed like you were trying to stay as true as possible to the actual happenings, and with the grandson surviving. Did you play around and write others possibly surviving just for your story, or were you always set on that one individual surviving?
Oh, ask her the question you want to ask, Kira, because we know how much you love her.
Well, you already asked my question. I can't ask the same one.
No, you love Tilly.
Hey, well, I was going to get to that. I was piggybacking off of yours.
You broke our heart with Tilly. We just all really loved Tilly, and we couldn't get over it. I went back and reread it because I was like, I must have read that wrong.
Right, yeah.
Oh God. I love Tilly too, I gotta tell you. All right, well, let me see if I can do both of these. So there were, there was the grandson who survived in real life. The grandson survived, and there were some more people who survived. It's actually really hard to get detailed information. It's not a very well documented event. Like people just know that the president and these bodies were found. But in terms of what happened to the people who survived, there's not a lot out there. There's just this one interview, and it's not accessible to most people because it's in Dari. It's in, so you have to understand the language to be able to know what's happening. And I don't think like even my parents didn't know that this grandson gave an interview. You just didn't happen to see it. But I found it in the digging. So I thought it'd be cool to have a survivor who connected with her, right? I mean, if it had been someone of an older generation, they wouldn't have been able to connect in the same way. But this was that one person from her childhood who knew her, who could recognize her, past everything that had changed in the years since that one event. It was that one person who had that real glimpse of who she was before. And then I wanted to talk about how, when you think that one person might be the one who can really see you and understand you, but she's changed so much and he's changed so much. And so the connection between them is kind of frayed by the years and everything that's happened in between. Now, Tilly, I had a lot of fun with. So what happened was in my research, there were, like I said, these American Foreign Service officers, and there's all these interviews online. And there was somebody whose mother happened to be visiting Afghanistan at that time during the coup. And she was on a rooftop somewhere like drinking martinis, I think it was, or something. And so that stuck with me. I'm like, drinking martinis on a rooftop in Kabul, like during a coup, like watching a coup happen, this mom who just flew in, and that got me. So that's it. And then from there, it was just about, how do I build out a woman who would fly across the world, go have martinis on a Kabul rooftop?
Did you have a Tilly in your life?
I don't know if I've had a Tilly in my life. I need more Tilly in my life. So I actually, to be able to imagine Tilly and see her, I Googled like pictures of, like my Google history is really sketchy, right? Like I hope no one looks it up ever, but I would Google pictures of like senior women getting high on weed, right? And just find an image. And then sometimes I'll just copy that, snip that little picture, and then just look at that lady sometimes when I need to reconnect with Tilly's voice. And then I just, I dolled her up a bit and gave her all that jazz. But that's how it works. Yeah, I Googled senior women, and you can find them, and they're really entertaining.
Really?
Yeah.
So now I'm gonna Google a senior woman.
There's like one video of I think there's 4, like the Golden Girls, and they're trying weed for the first time. It's pretty amazing.
Oh, I know what I'm watching later. We love Tilly, so it was hard to let her go.
It's hard for me too, but thank you for loving her.
Kristen, the K2 reader Kristen, listened on audio, so she has a question about that.
Okay. Hi. So I wanted to know if you had any say in selecting the narrator, Mazhan Marno.
I did. So I have, so I haven't listened to the audio.
Okay.
I mean, I've heard a little snip of it because I was just curious. And so I played the little sample that's available. But I have really liked her voice in, I don't know what I listened to her in, but then it was, when I was thinking about an audio, I thought, who would be great for this? And I remember thinking that her voice would kind of capture this character well. So I wrote a note to my editor and I said, I don't know. A lot of these things are just out of my hands. They just happen. Which is a good thing, right? I should not be designing covers. I should not be, picking narrators in general. That's not stuff I should be doing. But for this one, I offered that suggestion. I think she'd be great for it. And my editor agreed. And so I left it at that. I'm trying not to be a control freak with these things. And then I saw someone posted that they had heard an early, you get these early reads and then you've got early listening too. And I saw someone had posted and said, oh, Jean Marno was great doing the narration. I was like, oh, it worked out. So that's how I found out about it, was someone I think tweeted about it. But yeah, I think she did a great job.
I agree. Thank you.
That was awesome. I've always wondered that myself, to be honest, if you like have to interview people or if they just pick it, but I guess it makes sense if people kind of stay in their own lane.
Yeah, I think I have a really good relationship with my publisher, so I don't know if all do that, but sometimes they have given me like, these are 3 that we're considering, which would you prefer? And then with this one, I just kind of, threw it out there before they were asking.
Okay, next. Oh, Sadness. She had all this great background on Afghanistan. And so she like really wanted to know if you have recommendations for other books.
Oh, so I recently did a little post for, who did I do it for? For one of these websites about Electric Lit. I did recommendations about, they'd asked me to recommend books about Afghan women for Women's Day, yeah. And so I came up with a list of books that were actually written by Afghan women, and which I'd never seen before. So so I do have that. It's on Electric Lit, which I can share with you. I think I'm just trying to look at the.
Maybe if you have the link, you can email it to me and then I'll post it in our chat so they can get it.
So some of the stuff is ready on hand.
Oh, look at that. That's perfect.
Not everything, but some of this stuff is what I use for inspiration too. Like this is a poetry book, Load Poems Like Guns, which is pretty amazing. So the title of Sparks Like Stars comes from a poem by Nadia Anjuman, who was a poet who was killed, an Afghan woman poet, was killed by her husband actually. But that was cool for me because the other titles of my books come from Sufi poets, men from like 14th century, which is great. Hafiz and Rumi, like love it. But I really wanted to be able to do something more contemporary with this one. And I am horrible at coming up with titles. But I knew that I wanted an Afghan woman's poetry as the title for this one. My agent is the one who actually comes up with most of my titles. And so she called me one day and was like, what about this? And it's by an Afghan woman. And she didn't even know that that's what I wanted to do with this one. So it was pretty magical. Dancing at the Mosque came out recently. This is a memoir, a mother writing letters to her son. She was separated from her son when she and her husband divorced, and the father got custody in Afghanistan, and the challenges of being raised in Afghanistan under Taliban controlled times and then beyond. So that was really good. And then there's some just creative things that are out there, like this one where the writer has told a memoir of her journey out of Afghanistan, but it's kind of, it's not fiction. You cannot put this in any particular genre. And it's like an alphabet inspired journey with some like interesting paintings in it and stuff. So those are sort of, beyond textbooks and history books, what's out there that people don't generally see.
That is exactly what we want. Because I feel like so many of us read this and we are wormholers, right? We fall in love with these books and then we just want more and we just spiral. So yeah. I think a lot of us just wanted to know what else we should read that would fit.
Yeah, and there's some cool stuff out there. There's a lot more that's there now than when I was a young person. I mean, I'm still young, but when I was like in my 20s and trying to read, browsing through bookstores, there wasn't this amount of stuff out there. So it's exciting for me.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Amanda.
Technology, yeah. Okay. Hi, I loved your book. And one of my questions was, are any of your characters based on people that like in real life? Like did you look at a person in your life and go, this character or this person kind of acts like one of my, and then kind of and then make a character from that? Sorry. rambling?
That's a good question. In general, I try not to base any of my characters on actual people I know, especially if the character is a villain, because I don't want to create any, bad blood in the family. I think what I do is I might take like little character traits from someone, or just, a general like personality, something that I admire. That's a lot easier to take. But I try to have everyone be a bit removed, because the characters really have to be their own people. And they have to be people who kind of live in my head. And I used to think this was kind of crazy until I heard other authors talk about it. And it was very, affirming for me. But the characters have to be people that I get to know really, really well, and who live in my head. Like the characters from my next story are starting to live in my head, rent free right now. And then I spend this time getting to know them, so that when it comes time to like actually write the story, it makes a lot more sense for me to know what they're going to do, what they're going to say, and how they're going to react. And there's less of me, or there's less of people I know in them. It's them. And that, I think, is how, at least for me, how I create believable characters who do things that I wouldn't do. I don't have the guts to do, or, I wouldn't dare to do, but they do them because that's who they are.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, and plus you already mentioned that like you can't be writing about people because they'd come for you. They'd be like, what are you doing talking about me in that book?
Exactly. And people sometimes ask me for my first book. There's a lot of characters in my first book. And some people say, well, how did you come up with all the names for the characters? That was a question that I commonly got for that one. And I said, well, I basically went through a list of like Afghan names, and I crossed off everyone that was in the family and then used what was left.
Has anyone in your family been like, why haven't you put me in a book yet?
No, actually, I think everyone's pretty happy to be left out of the stories. I think they're okay with that. They want to be in the acknowledgements. They don't want to be in the story itself.
Right. Okay, Jackie, you are up next. Jackie has an Adam question.
My question was kind of about Adam and Clay, and like, what was the purpose of including him? We all kind of had our ideas, and I was just wondering, was he just a foil to show the difference between him and Clay and how they interacted with Ariana, or was he there for another purpose?
So I think Adam was there for a few different reasons. One being, again, I drew a lot on my own personal experience for this, and having done things in politics and civic engagement, and, I did run for office. I met a lot of people along the way.
What? You ran for office? We'll have to side that discussion. I want to hear about that next.
Side story. But I met people along the way where, you would just feel like, oh, this is a really cool person, has some interesting things that they're doing. And then they kind of get swept up in this movement of how do I fundraise? How do I get attention? How do I make connections with the right people? And it was just like this sucking power of dragging people into that stuff that we then read about in the news when it goes really awry, and then there's a scandal circling around them, right? So it was, maybe that stuff was really heavy on my mind at that time. And I wanted to talk about in this book anyway, how politics, these ambitions that people have a very real impact on people's lives. And I think in the moment, a lot of these figures don't realize that what's driving them might be ambition, because a lot of politicians are moving under this banner of, for the people, for the good of everyone. But underneath that, I think there's always a lot of like personal ambition that can become toxic if it's not kept under control.
I think a lot of people did not like Adam, but I enjoyed his character from the standpoint of being able to see her growth, like him as a tool to show like this kind of before and after with her, how she was so closed and reserved and, truly suffering from like PTSD and not even realizing it or dealing with it. So she kept herself so closed, and you see her kind of bloom as the book goes and as she, you know, learns more about herself and allows herself to feel again. So
yeah, I mean, I think for me, I at least, I do believe that the people we interact with and the people that we interact with very closely help us figure out who we are and sometimes help us get through some tough spots. You know, whether or not they're going to be with us on the other side of it, but at least we figure something else out about ourselves through them, right? We kind of, you know, bounce ourselves off of other people to get to know what we want, what we'll tolerate, what we won't tolerate, and what's important to us.
absolutely. Next up is Missy. Missy. Yep, she's on there.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I tabbed the heck out of this book. Lots of great quotes, lots of great moments. So one thing that I put a tab on was page 85. It was where Satara, where she was first taken to their house, and she's learning their names and whatnot, and she's learning how to say Tilly's name, and she basically says, I've never addressed an elder by a first name before. My parents would have been mortified. So I was just curious by that. Is that something that's like taboo in Afghan culture?
Yeah.
You know, like, do children have really superb manners? Or I was just, you know, that was just something that I like noted. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think there's also like a generational shift. Like when I was growing up, friends, moms, you know, were Mrs. So-and-so, or there was just kind of like that formality with it when we were children. In the Afghan culture, there's a lot of respect for elders. So a child would never address an adult by their first name.
Okay.
They're given sort of like, and I think you probably hear it like in the Indian culture as well, where you do like an auntie. People will call other women auntie, even if it's not your aunt, but rather you would address an older woman as auntie. So for this little girl, that's what she's kind of expressing at that moment, is like, well, how am I? And that's like a little bit of culture shock, right? A small little dose of it, but not being able to wrap her head around the fact that like, wait, I'm supposed to just call you by your first name. And I think I probably had that moments where I see other people doing things and then the shock of it kind of wears off. So writing these stories is a little bit of, you know, diving back into like remembering some of the shocks that I may have had growing up. Not that I grew up in Afghanistan, but I grew up in America, but in a household where the Afghan culture was really practiced. So there were certain things that I would experience in friends' homes or, you know, with certain people that I'd kind of be like, huh, that's different. So that's how you do it. And now my children call me by my first name. So it's really weird.
That is interesting. I would probably ground my children if they did that.
Yeah, no, but they do it like when they're upset with me.
Barbara. Okay, so I too tabbed the crap out of this thing.
Like, I gotta tell you, I really, really love that. Like, I'm a person who can spend hours in like Staples or any stationery store.
I love pens and pencils and
and
tabs and paper.
I love that. Thank you.
So, well, thank you, because the reason I tabbed so much is because your writing is, first of all, beautiful, but a lot of what you have to say is so profound. So I would tab these things and then just be like, gosh, I wish I had someone like that speaking that into my life. Like, this is one of my, I don't know if I can say my favorites, because honestly, it would take pages to explain my favorites, but this one really stood out, where Antonia is talking to her, and she says, love is the sun, grief is the shadow it casts. Love is an opera, grief is its echo. You cannot have one without the other, but if you follow the grief, you'll find your way back to love. Stunning, first of all, but where where are these words coming from? Like, do you have someone in your life who is like a wise sage, or are you just actually like an 85-year-old woman hidden in a 40-year-old woman's body?
I think there's something kind of organic about the writing process, because there are times where I will see something and I'll be like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. And then I'll realize that I wrote that, right? And like somebody had posted a, untold histories lie in shallow graves when they were writing about this book. And it's been a while since I actually wrote it, right? I mean, I've gone through revisions and stuff, but in the timeline of a book's life, there's the writing of it, and then there's a lot of time before it actually comes out. So when I saw this one quote, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I realized, oh, she'd pulled it like from the book. I think there's something that happens in the writing process where it almost feels like it's a channeling. So I don't feel in my day profoundly wise or, full of all this, like deep understanding or metaphysical understanding of life. I think that there's something that happens when you're really trying to channel characters, when you're really trying to process through them how we all deal with sadness in our life, how do we deal with happiness, and then just trying to put it in terms that we can understand. And how would I talk to a friend? So that's some of the stuff that I think is in there is, just when you're in the moment, sometimes you do land with the right words, and with the writing process, you have a bit of time to work through it. So I don't know if I wrote that in the first round or if that conversation got fine-tuned maybe in the third go through a draft. But there's something about, just kind of reworking with the words and with the communications that these characters are having with each other, just to be able to get them to say the things, where one can uplift another, where one can teach another how to process something that's happened. But I really do feel like that there's something a little bit mystical about the process of writing that is a little bit outside of the control of the writer's hand.
Well, I feel like I want some of these printed on my wall. That's how much I love these quotes. I just really connected with them. And I don't know if it's, I felt like a lot of this book really wrestled with this concept of what is home? Like, what is home? What does it mean to belong? How do you belong? So I think, that's a universal truth, whether you are a product of divorce, whether you are a refugee, whether you have moved a lot as a child, you're a military kid, there's so many people that can relate to that kind of wandering, or just that, even just that desire to want to be connected to something bigger. So did you tap into that from your own life, or?
I do a lot of observing, but my family has realized now, when they've read some of my stories, they were like, sometimes they ask me, they're like, where did you hear this? Or where did you, and I've heard things from them, through them. Home has been very different for me because home has been a lot more stable for me than it has been for a lot of people in my family, or a lot of people that I've come to know, my cousins, even people of my generation. So I've watched that definition for them change, and I just find people really fascinating. So I try to incorporate some of what I've learned about human behavior and what kind of ties different people together and those common experiences, because home is something that a lot of people, like you said, yearn for. And I look at my parents, for example, like the fried chicken stores that you see in the store. Like my dad owned fried chicken stores in the city, and like that stuff is all real. So it didn't take a lot of imagination to write it. Like when I was a kid, I would put mashed potatoes into little styrofoam cups and take quarters out of the cash register and go ride the little, like, I forget what you call those machines where they have the little rides in the corner of the old fried chicken stores. So there was a lot in there that I saw firsthand and experienced with people who were literally coming here with nothing and then really so excited to be Americans. You know, my dad, the way he talks about going to visit the White House on Easter and taking, you know, me when I was a baby to go roll an Easter egg in the lawn is pretty crazy. Like my parents, for the way people integrate a new culture, a new home into their lives. My parents yesterday made a fully authentic St. Patrick's Day meal. Like they did cabbage and potatoes and carrots, and they did a fresh, like homemade corned beef. They brought soda bread. They were dressed in green head to toe. Like my parents are Afghans in their 70s. I mean,
I feel like I want to hang out with your parents. You sound like they're awesome.
They are a riot. So, so I think, you know, this is them incorporating this home into their lives, right? And I think people do it in very, very different ways. Some people just kind of like buckle down and then just feel like they have to hang on to homeland a lot more tightly to feel okay. And my parents do a lot of that too. They're constantly watching the news to see what's happening in Afghanistan. We're also preparing for Nowruz, which is our first day of spring for us, is the new year. So we're doing all of those things too. But people just find different ways to be okay, I think, where they are, and to be able to say I'm home is sort of a luxury for some, and it's a gift to be able to feel comfortable enough to say it.
I think you captured the spirit of that just so well in this book. So thank you for that. As someone who has moved a lot. Miss Kira, you have another question?
I have two things that are kind of tied to one another. So it just seems like, you know, whenever we hear from authors, it's not all about the excitement of the book getting published because you're so just passionate and attached to these characters. I guess for you, is that hard to let that go? And then my second question is, you're clearly dropping hints of new characters in your mind. So can you share some details of what's to come? Maybe some time frames?
Time frames are so off right now. I had a manuscript that was due in January. I've never been late with anything, but there's like no end in sight. I don't know. Well, hopefully I'll be able to finish that one up, but that will be my first YA title. And that one is more
Yay!
Yeah, I'm excited to do that genre. That one was like, you know, okay, it's one thing to write middle grade. I have a couple like I've got a 10-year-old at home. I've got a 9-year-old at home. So I can channel that energy. I can write the middle grades, which I've done. To do the adult stuff, obviously, okay, I'm technically an adult and I've been able to, you know, do that kind of stuff. And then I sat down and I was like, well, let me write YA. And that just made me feel so old because you realize that you've got to do a lot more research. It's a lot easier to do research around like a coup of 1978 Afghanistan than it is to do research into the mind of a teenager, I'll tell you.
Watch endless hours of TikTok.
I guess so. So that is what's on the more like immediate horizon. I would hope that if I can get it done, if my first grader went back to school, this physical school this week, I'm hoping that my other ones will soon follow. And then if I can just like actually get free time at home to be able to write, I'm hoping that one, there's usually a year out. So if I finish it now-ish, then it should come out a year from now. And then I've got other characters living in my head, but I'm not sure what they're going to do yet. I have to come up with some ridiculous stuff for them to do after that. And then there was the other question that you had, which I can't remember now, of course.
It was more of a deeper question of just kind of like your emotional ties to a book and letting it out into the world, because then you're done with those characters unless it's a sequel. Just your thoughts on that.
So this is a thought that I realized recently. You know, you guys have been so amazing posting things on Instagram, and I've been, you know, following and just like out of my mind happy with the reception for this book, which has been amazing. And I try to make comments. And the other night I was trying to comment and I was typing, "Thank you for reading." And I almost typed and I erased it. Didn't sound right. And then I say "this book." And I realized that's what I always say. I say "this book." I don't like calling things my book. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, why can't I call it my book? And it's because I can write the book, but I truly, like, in my heart, believe that once I have shared the book, it's our book. And there's a Khalil Gibran's another, one of these poets, and he has a poem where he's talking about children. He says, your children are not your children, that they pass through you and they are of the world, right? And it occurred to me, I'm like, this book is not my book. This book is coming through me, but once you pick it up, it's our book, and you will read it in your way, and someone else will read it in their way, and then we kind of integrate these books into our lives. But that's why I think it really felt unauthentic for me to say this, thank you for reading my book, because it's no longer that. And I'm so grateful for it. I'm so grateful that we are able to share it and have these different experiences. With one of my books, I sat down with someone and she was commenting about a paragraph I'd written. And she said, oh, what you're saying about marriage here, that you mean this. And I was like, oh, actually, no, I didn't mean that. I meant, she's like, no, it means this. And I think that was the moment that I realized that it's truly it's like a partnership with these stories. I can write it one way with one intention, but everybody will read it and extract from it how it sits with them. It's very different.
I think that also speaks a lot to your heart, though. I mean, too, because I think if you are a gracious, thankful person, then you admit that. And so I think that, some of that is just the core of who you must be if you feel like it's this group project, because really you did work really hard. We're thankful.
I did. No, I mean, I definitely, I put the work in, but honestly, I had never imagined being able to do something like this, to be able to say that I've put out a story and that people are reading it, is beyond what I dreamed in my lifetime. So I am really grateful for it. And it's been an experience that, sometimes I just want to sit down and kind of like think about it to not miss it.
Well, that ties in really well to Alana's question, because we all think you're a rock star. So Alana, is she on here still, or do I need to ask her question?
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can hear you, yeah.
Nadia, thank you so much for this book. It's so beautiful, and I so appreciate hearing your words as you speak about it. But I have a question more about how your process and how you balance it all. I mean, I was reading your book jacket. I was like, oh my gosh, she's a pediatrician, she's a mother, she's, this amazing writer, and now running for office. And I'm just so curious about how you work that just life-work balance. How do you manage that?
So I get that question a lot. I think that I've been able to do what I've been able to do because I've got like really amazing support in my life. My parents really enabled me to become a pediatrician. They, said the sky's the limit for you, do whatever you want. But, brown parents want you to become a doctor or an engineer. And like, that's really it, right? You're a doctor, an engineer, or a disappointment. But that aside, my parents really gave me freedom to do what I wanted to do. And when I got married, it was my husband who really encouraged me. He would see me reading all the time. And he said, I think you probably have a story in you. Why don't you try it? Why don't you, work on it? And so that supportive kind of foundation, because it takes a real leap to do something that's vastly different from your day job, right? It's a leap of faith. And sometimes it's a risk. Sometimes it's a financial risk. And we were really fortunate to be able to take that. I think in the arts, really, you need to have like some kind of support, some kind of safety net, because it is a big leap. When I started writing, I was working in an emergency room in DC, so at Children's Hospital. And on days that I wasn't working, then I would just try writing. I was, writing on my computer and just trying to see if I could put together a story, and not really imagining that it would get picked up and that it would turn into a book. At that time, I was pregnant with my first. So things at home were a lot more calm, a lot more, manageable. And then over the years, I've had to like change my balance of what I'm doing. There are 24 hours in the day, and we've got 4 kids, so our hands are full. And then in the pandemic, let's be real, like I'm not writing. I think it's okay to say that, because it would be really deceiving to be like, oh, it's no problem. Yeah, I'm being a pediatrician and I'm writing and it's all perfect and my kids are phenomenally, well adjusted. That's not really the case right now. So over the years, I've done a little bit of like rebalancing. So I've worked less and less and less as a pediatrician. I've done more and more and more time writing because that's what it demanded of me. And I was fortunate to be able to do it. I like getting involved with organizations, with civic stuff, with nonprofits. So I do that as much for myself as I do to do stuff for people. It makes me feel good. And it's my ability to connect with people that we're like-minded, we have similar interests. So you end up hanging out with people that are on the same page. So I do a bit of that stuff. But this year it's been kind of a wrap. What I've been able to do is revising and editing, which is easier to manage, doesn't take as much like focusing power. But like I said, this is the first time I've actually missed a deadline. I'm hoping that we'll be able to turn things around, but it's been really, really hard to concentrate this past year. I'm not working right now as a pediatrician, so I've been home with my kids. But thankfully, even with that, I've got the support of my parents who come in every day and cook like St. Patrick's Day meals for us. So, we're figuring it out. I've had nanny support along the way to get me through. So, this, I think, a good time to acknowledge the people who let me do this thing that I really like doing.
I love that because it's also just very honest. Like we, as women, I think try to wear so many hats. We try to be the nurturer, we're wives and parents and business owners and yeah. There's so much. And so I think it's okay to ask for help and get help. So
yeah, I think there's a lot of, there was a lot of lean in, be fully invested in your career, but at the same time, you've got to do everything at home. And then at the same time, you've got to do your self-care. And sometimes it's really hard to figure out when you're supposed to do all of these things. So I think that one of the things that came out of this pandemic is a little bit of realization of like, it's really hard to do everything. It's really hard to be everything to everyone. And so if we can all just sometimes you just want to Netflix and chill because that's what you're able to do on that particular day, right?
And that's okay. It's okay to know that about yourself and allow yourself the flexibility of character to take a day like that or a week, exactly. Or in this case, the past year. So do you have any time for reading? Like, do you read for pleasure yourself? And if you do, what do you like to read?
I read a lot. And I try to read a little bit of everything because I'm constantly learning from everything that I'm reading. So if it's nonfiction, I'm learning that. I've tried to do a little bit more poetry in my life because I've realized sometimes that's what you need is just like a verse that will resonate with you. I'm reading, so I usually have like my what's on tap, and there is like what's on tap on my phone, which I'm reading, like a digital read. And then I have an audio read at the same time. I have something that I'm reading on my nightstand, like a physical book, which I more rarely get to. So that's a much more slow read for me. But those are usually books that I know I'm going to underline. I know I'm going to, try to flag stuff. And then I have a book that I'm reading with my kids at night. So we'll do chapter books and then I'll try to read them a chapter every night. So I'm reading a lot, and I tell myself and people around me that I have to do it as a writer. It's part of my process. And that's how I get away
You're just
with
taking one for the team here. It's so much work.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly it. Because I don't have time to go to retreats or workshops. So I get to read.
So what are those 4 things that you've got right now? Can you think of them off the top of your head? What's your online book and your what did you say? Online book, audiobook, nightstand book, and kids book.
Okay, so nightstand book is Lily King, Writers and Lovers, and like this is like simmering, slow.
Savor that one. Yep. That
one is really good. Phantom Tollbooth is what I'm doing with the kids right now.
Is that a series or what middle grade?
Middle grade, the Phantom Tollbooth, the oldie but a goodie.
Yeah.
So getting a kick out of that because I've realized it's been so long since I've read it that like I've forgotten I've forgotten what it was. I don't remember storylines very well. So it's really nice to be able to do that with them. And then we spend time like kind of talking about it. We do like mini book club at bedtime.
Oh, how fun.
Audio, I'm doing The Good Sister. I do like these little like psychological thrillers. I like that.
Kira, write that one down. She's our thriller queen.
And then on my phone, I'm reading The Last Story of Mina Lee.
Oh,
That one.
I like that author.
Yeah, so I'm almost about to wrap that one up. That one will probably I'll finish that one up tonight, which has been that's a really good one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that one too. We loved this particular book, but we also know that you have other books. So if we could read one of your other books, we'll read all of them, I promise. But like, what do you recommend next? Or do you have a favorite of all of yours? Do you have one that's like your baby?
They're all my babies in different ways. Like my kid, like they're just different.
Yeah.
I think my first book is The Pearl That Broke Its Shell. And that one, if you like the book club vibe, a lot of book clubs have read that one and had lots to talk about.
I've had a few people recommend that to me when they saw that I was reading that. They were like, have you read this one?
Yeah, and that was the one that kind of, was my introduction into the world of putting a book out. So it was like, I just think of that one as like this tornado of, oh my gosh, wait, what? And book signings and people read the book and then I talk to them about it. Like it's pretty crazy. So, but people have had lots to talk about with that one.
I wrote that one down. So we will read that one next. Do you have a favorite genre? Or do you just read whatever?
I read a little bit of everything. I do like the psychological thrillers. I don't know what's wrong with me. Why do we like them? Isn't it kind of concerning about us that we like them?
I feel like it's so unrealistic maybe that it's like fun.
I don't know. I mean, there's always like a dead body and then you don't know which of these people could have done it because they all could have possibly done it. Like, so what kind of, it's really
Kira, what kind of a sicko are you that you read those all the time?
I was typing. I wasn't going to interrupt. I think for me, I like to challenge my mind. And Leighellen always just goes straight to me when we have the halfway, like, okay, what do you think? Because I just love to dissect and be logical at the same time. So I think for me, it's just the brain power to kind of try to figure it out.
Right. So maybe it's the puzzle aspect of it. Yeah. I grew up watching like Murder, She Wrote and Matlock, and I played Clue all the time. Right. So I think it's that, right? It's not like the murder that draws us in. But yeah, I like that.
Write that? Will you ever write one of those?
I don't know. It's such a different genre for me. I'm not sure. I don't really know if it's because they do it in such a unique way. And that's what I love about it. I love being able to read things that I feel like I can't do. Like when I go out to eat, I want to eat something that I couldn't possibly cook at home, right?
That's a great point. Let me see who else had a question. I think Jackie had a question about Sitara. Yeah, Jackie, are you still on here? She had a question about Sitara reconnecting. Let me see if she's on here still.
Yeah, I'm still on here. Okay. I'm just quiet because I've got so many different things going on right now. And the book, the puzzle thing with the thrillers is absolutely accurate. We did the guest list for our book club last month at my library, and we did an escape room that my boss actually planned and put together for us.
Oh, that's very cool. I listened to the guest list not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and that was a good one too. Yeah. My review on Goodreads, I think I said that this is like a really good time to read about destination weddings that go horribly, horribly wrong. So you don't have any like fear of missing out, right? Like all the books about plane crashes right now, bring them all on.
Okay, so my first question kind of connects back to Leighellen's question about Sitara and her growth. How did you choose which characters to have her reconnect with and then kind of not reconnect with because the soldier guy died and her childhood friend, they kind of met, talked, and that was kind of the end of it because they realized they didn't have anything in common? So how did you pick who she reconnected with and then have her split away from those characters?
So I wanted her to reconnect with the soldier because of who he represented to me. You know, this person who was involved in the coup, who was there at this really horrific moment, who bore some responsibility, and she's not sure how much responsibility for, you know, what happened to her family that night. But it was really him who had taken her out of the palace. And so, you know, in one way, he was involved in absolutely ruining her life and robbing her of everything. And then on the other hand, he's also part of saving her from that. So I wanted her to intersect with him again because he was the person who could really help her unlock a lot of, you know, what happened at that time. With the other characters, I mean, a lot of the people were lost to her that night, and like I said, that a lot of the people that I've seen in my life around me, where they really struggle to connect with people from very long ago, if so much has happened to them in between, if they've been apart for very, very long, and their experiences have been very, very different. Like when I stepped foot into Afghanistan, watching the reaction of people who were in Afghanistan of my parents' generation, the way they would look at my parents, for example, like it was very clear that my parents had not been in the country for a very long time. So there's something that kind of changes about you when you are in very different places, when you are in very different places or stations in life as well, that, you know, there's a lot that can be there, but if you're still physically going to be apart, it's really hard to maintain those connections.
And then the other question I had is because I'm an audio listener, because I'm either subbing at school or working at the library. So I do a lot of this on audio, and I enjoy it because the names I know how they're supposed to sound instead of how they sound in my head. I was wondering if she's Afghan as well, because she did an amazing job bringing those characters to life.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that again. So there's so much good feedback on the narration, and I did kind of push her name to my editor as a suggestion, a strong suggestion, because I'd listened to her. She is Iranian, I believe. So I figured she might, you know, recognize some of the words. The language is similar. That's a different dialect that we have in Afghanistan versus the Iranian dialect of Farsi versus Dari. Interestingly, the clip that I listened to, she does pronounce the names differently than I would pronounce them. But I think she probably handles some of the other, you know, words or little nuances with a little bit more ease than someone completely outside of the culture would.
The other person that has a question is Ellie.
Hi. So I have a question about the writing process. Were there any moments or like events in the book that maybe didn't make it into the first draft that kind of manifested itself while you were writing, maybe like the second, or while you were editing or something like that?
Oh, that's a good question. So there is well, it's almost the reverse. Like there's a lot that I've had to go through and cut going from a first draft to a second draft. And then what I do is I end up like kind of cutting it and putting it somewhere in another file on my computer because I'm like, oh, but I put so much effort into that, and surely I will use it somewhere else because I could not have done all of that work in vain, right? And then I never end up using it because the story just has to go through that process of getting reshaped and refined. So I've got all these kind of like random chunks that are, you know, just kind of like carved off and reworked. I did initially start writing this story from two perspectives, wanting to see the events through Antonia's eyes as well. And then in talking with my agent, kind of, you know, you got to like struggle with these drafts, and is it working? Is it not working? Is something distracting? Her suggestion was just focus on the girl. And so that's what I did, and tried to find ways not to lose Antonia's perspective, because that was valuable to me, was having an American watch that event unfurl and have been some part of, you know, what was happening on the ground leading up to that particular event.
That's so interesting because this group, we do read historical fiction. So the dual point of view, dual timeline, that's a pretty, standard, I don't know, what do you call it? Literary way to
Yeah.
So I actually found it very unique that it was one perspective, because I felt like we really got to get to know her. Like I loved her and it's told over a 40-year span. So you really I feel like you get invested in her life. And in fact, we did a midway chat for this. So we read it and had a midway chat and then a final chat. And I remember at the midway, we were like, we're not even to the present yet. How is she gonna, what is gonna happen? Like, we're still in the past. But it allowed us to, I feel like, really get to know her, and she is just a special character, and then get to appreciate the growth that she goes through in this book.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of the struggle of the writing is what do I throw in her path that will cause her to grow, that will cause her to
which
have,
speaking of, okay, one of the things we did not, I don't have a necessarily question for it, but she goes through this horrible event in her childhood, and then we know that she goes on to be a doctor, but in between there's this little section of discomfort where she's in this foster home.
Yeah.
So tell us about adding that whole, because that's a whole other can of worms and element, and that you could write whole books on the foster care system. So
you could. And I think, obviously as a pediatrician, you kind of intersect with that, especially in the emergency room too. You have some intersections. So I think that I tried to also be a bit real with the logistics of what would happen to a child who is suddenly coming over. And I sat down with this, the woman who I had consulted, who was a Foreign Service officer. Like I literally sat down and interviewed her and kind of bounced ideas off of her of how would you get a girl out of the country? How, and so I kind of, offered a few different scenarios. And then the one that I had narrowed my own imagination down to get her feedback on it. But then you get to, well, what happens when she lands here? And what do you do with a girl who doesn't really have anyone? And that's part of, I think, I write in other books about the immigrant experience, about the refugee experience, and this idea that, once they land here, that it's all roses from then on, right? That they're welcome, that it's home, that everything's fine because they escaped, and all of that is behind them.
Like America just magically solves all the problems.
Right. And that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes a whole other phase of struggle starts as soon as they land here, and not just in, financial or in cultural, but in many other ways that are very, very difficult. And you can see that, when we talk about what's happening in the country now, this wave of, anti-Asian sentiment and violence that's happening, is, what kinds of experiences do people have? And then children also. I honestly feel like people who have suffered one trauma, it's almost like there are certain people that in your life that it's just, they keep having horrible things happen in their story. And so those are the people that I'm writing about, is those people who, didn't just have one bad day, but they have overcome a lot. And I don't feel like it's outside of the realm of reality, because I just know people in my life who have gone through a lot.
Yeah, there's that scene where she's in her bed and he comes in and goes to the other girl and is rubbing her back, and I was like, oh no, oh no, I don't want this story to go here. Oh no, I don't want this to happen to her. I wanted to protect her in that moment, but realistically that stuff happens, right? So did you kind of wrestle with that scene or just even her time in the foster home, of the abuses that she would have to endure?
I definitely wrestled because by the time I got to that point in her story, I knew her well enough. I had spent enough time with her that it was almost hard. It's hard to do. You know, you want your character, if you care about them, you want them to do well, right? You don't want to torture them. But at the same time, you do want to pay them the respect that they're due. If they're a person who has survived trauma, then you don't want to gloss over it. You don't want to, you know, kind of sugarcoat the experience of people who have been through so much. And so that's why I think, you know, I tried not to go too deeply into, I don't write too much in the mechanics of what's happening, because I
don't
think
you need to. I mean,
it's
honestly,
bad enough, right? It's bad enough just to know these things are happening. When you care about a character, then you get there and you just don't, we would want to like just extract them from that moment and free them.
Yeah, as you know, we discussed that scene in our midway chat, and that's kind of what we came to was, you know, it was horrible, and we were like, why would she do that to her? That's awful. But that seems to be, you know, what happens sometimes. And like you said, it just seems like, you know, we do want to think that when people reach these shores of America, that they have these amazing, miraculous opportunities that help them move on. But in reality, especially as a child, you know, you were stuck in a system that doesn't necessarily protect you. And that whole scene, and not even just that particular scene, but just that moment in her life, you know, just enduring even just the woman's harsh ways of verbal abuse, like lack of food they're giving them, the chores they're making them do, that happens. And but it's also part of her, again, the character's growth and why we come to just love her as an adult. You know, when you meet her again, it just makes it even that much more unfathomable that she's like this amazing, smart, strong, confident woman.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, like I said, we see kind of amazing women around us. I know amazing women who, you know, through conversations and you know, what people have been able to share, what they've chosen to share of some abuses that they have endured and overcome. And like I said, you just don't know, right? When you're sitting down with someone or at a workplace, you just don't know what they're carrying or what they've been through.
No, and what's interesting is she kind of has that same thought process with Shair, right? Because she's angry with him when she first meets him. You know, it seems like she goes through this process of vengeance in the beginning, or wanting answers, wanting vengeance, wanting, you know, some solution. And by the end, it's more, there's like a compassion and an understanding that even all that he went through was different than her experience. And he had loss and trauma from that event as well. So she kind of goes through that same.
Yeah. You know, just reading the Phantom Tollbooth with my kids, there's the chapter about point of view and perspective, right? He's a little boy the little boy is like floating in the air, and he says, we start here and then we grow down. And that's so weird that you grow up because you're constantly seeing things from a different point of view. And I think that's what happens, right? Like that's such a smart scene, because as we grow, we see things either because we're looking at it from a different, you know, perspective, or because different things have happened to us that now we can appreciate someone else's point of view and how they may take and process, you know, an event. So that was her. That was her just kind of, you know, growing. And I didn't know by the end, when I was writing the beginning, I didn't know in the end how she would feel about the soldier. Because I needed her to kind of go through the motions and then see what felt most natural by the time I got to the end.
I mean, it did feel natural. I mean, they felt like people that I knew. So, okay, friends, that is the end of my giant list of questions. Does anyone else have a question before we go? I want everyone to grab their books. Does everyone have their books handy? Because I'm going to be all nerdy and take a picture of all of us with you, because we loved this book. We love you. We would love to continue to share it. So,
oh, that's so cool.
Let me switch to gallery mode. Everybody go get your books if you got them. If you watched on a phone, you can just hold up your phone.
Hooray for audio. I'm so glad that audio counts. Everyone's fine with that now. I felt like I was cheating in the beginning.
I think there is still a weird backlash with some people, but in the Bookstagram, in this like legit Bookstagram community, we love our audiobooks.
I love it.
Especially us mamas, frankly, or students, or like we're all busy people. And so to be able to listen,
delight.
You can listen while you're doing laundry. You can listen while you're driving to work. You can listen. It's fantastic. So hold up your book. Okay. You ready? Do you have one of your books? Oh,
I do.
Yay! All right, everybody got their book. Everybody, yep, I see everybody's books. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Yay! Okay, I'll take a couple because who knows how these will turn out. If you guys have a camera, you can take a picture too. All right, everybody good?
Awesome. Oh my God, thank you guys so much.
Nadia, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for bringing that great presentation and sharing with us those pictures. It just really deepened our experience. But most of all, thank you for writing this book. We loved it so much. All the stars to you. All the best of luck as you go about continuing to promote this too.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, I think this is, I'm relatively newer to Bookstagram. So this has just been like amazing. I love it. I spend too much time on it.
Well, you're rocking it.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for the other book recommendations, because now I'm following many of you and definitely adding to my nightstand too.
The never ending TBR.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate you so much for reading with us and chatting about this book and just enjoying reading as much as I do. So I love all of you so much. So thank you. Thanks, Nadia.
Thanks, everyone.
I will be sure to record this, or it's recording, whatever, and post it. So you can rewatch it, or people who missed out can watch it. So
awesome. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and discussing Sparks Like Stars. I appreciate all your time and effort, and I appreciate Nadia's time as well. So thank you very much, and come to the next one. Rose Code is next, the Rose Code, and we will chat that book next.
Please subscribe, come back, and watch some more. We will be doing this next week. I will be chatting with Kate Quinn, and the week after that, I will be chatting with Amy Harmon. So come back again to watch our next video. Stay tuned for more.